European Schoolnet is a network of 34 Ministries of Education, and we work quite a lot on the transformation of teaching and learning processes, and we're really concerned by developing innovative processes concerning the transformation of these teaching and learning processes. So the objective really of this Innovation School Forum is to become the place where we celebrate innovation, we value quite interesting initiatives coming from various stakeholders.
As a representative of the Ministry of Education, I think that the most important is to allow all of the different actors in the educational community to interact and to collaborate among others, so that they can find examples, very good examples that are already going on and that can be followed by other teachers and by other schools. It is also true that facilitating a good environment so that schools and teachers feel comfortable to experiment and to innovate with their students is really the basis for this change and for this innovation, this transformation of schools. That is what we are looking for.
I think it is important that we see what is needed. So what do the people in the school need? And this is a great platform. And I think that we should do this more often. If we talk to each other, we learn from each other, and we share our knowledge.
All the teachers would work collaboratively. That means that you're not isolated in your classroom.
My school that I dream to work in is a school where you emphasize play and creativity. So both for students and for the teachers. So me as a teacher, I can play with the kids, and it's all about being imaginative.
My dream school is one that pays attention to the past, but I do think it's one that has to be living in the present and thinking about how it can use that present to make changes and to transform. So it's building upon that bedrock of what was there before, what we knew already, and being willing to take risks and willing to make changes.
My dream school to work in would probably be a really adaptable school, somewhere that has spaces that can be adapted for any subject, STEM, humanities, that allows me to be innovative and allows the students to really get involved in their own learning.
And it's very key to have an organization like Future Classroom Lab and EU Schoolnet to assist with that and to facilitate that connection between the private and public sector.
The birth of the School Innovation Forum was that all activities were a little bit atomized, and it was important to find a place where all stakeholders could discuss together, could exchange, could reflect, and to build together what should be the challenges for the next education agenda for the next period.
Good afternoon. You have just watched the short video we produced for the latest School Innovation Forum we could organize online. And connecting to that, I'm particularly happy and excited to welcome you all very warmly to this online edition, which revolves around the topic of emerging technologies, an ecological view on artificial intelligence in education. I'm Tommaso Dalla Vecchia, Development and Advocacy Manager at European Schoolnet, and I'm here at the Future Classroom Lab in Brussels to be your host today, which is a great pleasure and an honor for me. The School Innovation Forum is organized by European Schoolnet, a non-for-profit international association built by 32 ministries of education across Europe and beyond. All our members are committed to explore and bring about innovation in teaching and learning. Our mission is, in fact, to help education stakeholders make the most of digital technologies for transforming educational processes so they are better suited for 21st century digitalized societies. We do that by testing and mainstreaming innovative teaching practices, by sharing evidence about the impact they have and they can have, and bringing together ministries of education for there to collaborate and share. We don't federate only ministries, but also industry, schools, and policymakers at different levels alike. Digital technologies have been within the scope of European Schoolnet for decades now, but the challenges faced by the education system because of the COVID-19 challenges, together with the acceleration of the development and integration of new emerging technologies across all sectors, has suggested that the change that we would see happening in the world we live in might happen possibly at a higher pace compared to what we have imagined. And we cannot ignore that the education sector is actually one of those that might be most impacted by the integration of these emerging technologies. Emerging technologies may impact schools in the teaching, learning, and assessment processes, but also on management, government, and decision-making within institutions and schools. That's why European Schoolnet thought it was important to specifically focus in this domain this year, to open a dialogue, to open a consultation with all our members, because artificial intelligence in education was a very high topic in the agenda of our members and the wider community. With the School Innovation Forum, we want to listen to different perspectives and point of view. We want to open up an open conversation and then learn from that. Also to build better planning for capacity building for schools, teachers, and ultimately students. We will actually wear our critical lenses while talking about artificial intelligence in education. We will certainly talk about its potentials, but at the same time, we will focus also on the criticalities, on the ethical concerns, on other matters that are linked to that. Ultimately, we want to make sure that AI-enabled technology is there to support teaching and learning and not trying to replace teachers, of course. So ultimately, also, we want that our students are capable and well-placed and empowered to work and live along AI-operated systems and tools and in a digitalized society. This event is part of a continuous conversation. So we really encourage you to share from wherever you are connected in the chat that you find below or on the side of the video streaming you're following about your thoughts, your comments. Please feel free to be open with us and also challenge what we are proposing. Please follow also, if you like, the School Innovation Forum hashtag. And why not, as this has been a tradition lately in many webinars and online events, tell us where you are connecting from. It's always good to feel less isolated and part of international community of like-minded people. Before going to introducing you the first very high-level speakers that manifested their interest to participate in this debate, I would like to thank, first of all, the European Parliament for supporting this event and for granting us with their patronage, which is very much appreciated. And then, well, very well connected to that, I have the pleasure to confirm that we received a statement from the President of the European Parliament, David Maria Sassoli, which we will stream now. And even though he doesn't need to be introduced, of course, we can still say a few words about his background. He has been a successful journalist at the beginning of his career. He directed the main news broadcasting program in Italy. He was elected in 2009 at the European Parliament as one of its members, and he acted as the head of the Italian Democratic Party group. In 2014, he was elected vice president, and finally in July 2019, president of the European Parliament. So it's with great pleasure and honor that I leave the floor to you, dear President, and I thank you once again for contributing to the event.
Buongiorno a tutte le autorità presenti, un saluto particolare ai rappresentanti dei vari ministeri dell'istruzione, un saluto a tutti i partecipanti. Vi ringrazio per avermi invitato a questo evento. che affronta una delle tematiche più attuali dell'agenda europea, perché durante quest'ultimo anno milioni di persone si sono affidate alle tecnologie digitali, in particolare alle connessioni internet per lavorare, studiare, acquistare cibo, comunicare con i propri cari. Ma non tutti hanno avuto questa possibilità e la mancanza di accesso a internet, così come tutte le altre sfide delle tecnologie digitali, hanno rappresentato un problema molto serio che dobbiamo affrontare per evitare ulteriori emarginazioni e ingiustizie. Come sappiamo, la pandemia ha avuto un forte impatto sui sistemi di istruzione e formazione, ha accelerato la trasformazione digitale, si è innescata la forza di un cambiamento rapido su larga scala. Ormai è chiaro che la domanda non è se la transizione digitale avverrà, ma se questo succederà per tutti. C'è bisogno di un'azione strategica. Gli Stati membri dovrebbero fare pieno uso dello strumento di recupero e resilienza dell'Unione Europea per adattare i loro programmi di studio e sistemi di formazione nell'era digitale. È necessario ripensare l'istruzione in generale, riflettere sulla ridefinizione dell'insegnamento, sul ruolo degli insegnanti, sulla conseguente riqualificazione necessaria per adattarsi a un sistema educativo basato sull'intelligenza artificiale. Rafforzare le competenze digitali e raggiungere un elevato standard di alfabetizzazione digitale a livello europeo è un prerequisito per l'uso dell'intelligenza artificiale nell'istruzione. Oggi, nell'era digitale, il 42% della popolazione dell'Unione Europea è ancora privo di competenze, non ha basi. La crisi è stata un campanello d'allarme e sviluppi che avrebbero potuto richiedere anni sono avvenuti in poche settimane. Siamo ora di fronte a sfide e opportunità e il nostro obiettivo dovrebbe essere quello di garantire che la tecnologia educativa dell'intelligenza artificiale sia utilizzata per potenziare gli utenti, gli insegnanti, gli studenti. Tutte le persone dell'Unione devono acquisire competenze necessarie per comprendere meglio le capacità e i limiti dell'intelligenza artificiale. Il Parlamento europeo dall'inizio di questo mandato sta lavorando su questo fronte e ha persino creato una commissione speciale sull'argomento, prestando particolare attenzione alle considerazioni etiche e umanocentriche dell'intelligenza artificiale, in linea con i valori fondamentali dei diritti umani e dei principi democratici. L'utilizzo di nuove tecnologie non può farci dimenticare quali sono i nostri valori, in modo che l'intelligenza artificiale diventi veramente uno strumento al servizio delle persone, del bene comune, dell'interesse generale dei cittadini. Dobbiamo assicurarci che siano soddisfatti i prerequisiti per la sua diffusione, per il suo uso pertinente in termini di accesso a internet, sui temi della connettività, delle reti, delle infrastrutture, del pluralismo e della non discriminazione. Questo momento in cui l'Unione Europea progetta la sua ricostruzione è il momento giusto per continuare nella direzione che abbiamo già scelto per la difesa della neutralità della rete, una transizione digitale democratica con le libertà fondamentali al centro, con l'accesso ad internet come nuovo diritto umano. Vi ringrazio ancora, continuiamo a lavorare insieme e spero di potervi anche incontrare di persona appena questo tempo così difficile lo permetterà.
And it's us that thank you, President Sassoli, for your kind words and for setting also the emphasis on the social aspects that are connected to this topic that we will certainly make sure to address during the full forum this year. We are now honored to welcome the speech also of Commissioner Thierry Breton. Thierry Breton is the current European Commissioner for Internal Market. His responsibilities include, among others, the device of a comprehensive long-term strategy to help European industry lead the green and digital transition while ensuring fair competition, the announcements of Europe's technological sovereignty, and emphasis on data, artificial intelligence, 5G, defense and space technology. Moreover, Commissioner Breton is responsible for strengthening EU tools to prevent and counter disinformation and fake information, online and offline, while preserving freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and media pluralism. We are, again, very thankful for Commissioner Breton to have sent us his address. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address the School Innovation Forum this year. The switch to distance learning has been one of the greatest challenges that our education and training systems have ever faced, for all children, parents, and of course, teachers alike. The pandemic has shown the importance of a good internet connection during times of remote schooling, of course, but also during times when schools are open. Connecting schools to high-speed internet is the precondition to ensure online learning and to enable digital education in schools. We have the ambition and the tools to achieve this. In our vision for the digital decade, the Commission set a target that everyone should have access to gigabit connectivity by 2030. And with the Recovery Fund and EU programs, we have the necessary fundings to make this target a reality. The pandemic has put our digital competences and skills on the test. Every European citizen needs basic digital literacy so she or he can use the digital technologies that surround us. Our target is that by 2030, 80% minimum of all adult population in Europe will have basic digital skills. We also need digital experts who can develop technologies such as artificial intelligence to make our businesses more innovative. We need more than 20 million digital experts across all industrial ecosystems by 2030. And this cannot happen without innovation in schools, without you. We need to make sure that everyone in Europe, including children, can benefit from digital technologies in teaching and learning. That our young generation have digital skills they need to find jobs or launch their own startup and technology. I know that today, the focus of your forum is on artificial intelligence. The crisis has acted as an accelerator of trends, notably for the adoption of emerging technologies. New technologies, such as artificial intelligence, open up a wealth of opportunities for students and teachers. They improve learning and teaching, provide student assessments, personalize tutoring, and identify also potential learning challenges. But we also need to ensure that our values and principles of quality and inclusive education are fully respected. This is why we recently proposed a regulation on AI to minimize risk to safety and fundamental rights posed by these systems, including AI technology used in educational or vocational training. Many teachers, parents, and students worry about the consequences of the use of data and emerging technologies. In this respect, I can only emphasize the importance of developing at least a basic understanding of AI and its applications in education by teachers and students. The Commission has launched a number of initiatives. We support Code Week, and we run, for example, the EU Code Week online course, AI Basic for Schools. A course that was followed by over 3,000 teachers. There are also tutorials and lesson plans for teachers in 29 languages. These are all available for free on the Code Week website. A continuous dialogue on the appropriate and responsible uses of AI in education remains a must in this process. I am happy to see that the School Innovation Forum 2021 contribute to such an effort. And I would like to wish you all very fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Breton, for having taken the time to write to us, to record to us this interesting address. And thank you for reminding the importance of securing every European citizens have the necessary digital competencies and skills to thrive in today's world. We will also make sure to address these elements within our workshops and activities during this School Innovation Forum. Now, we would like to hear also the perspective of national member states after having listened to European institutions first. And we will start going to Italy, also since Italy has been for quite a long time the chair member of European Schoolnet. And we have the great pleasure and honor to welcome today Professor Patrizio Bianchi, the Italian Minister of Education. Patrizio Bianchi is also Professor of Economics and Industrial Policy at the University of Bologna and the University of Ferrara. Since 2010, he has taken on the responsibility of being the Chancellor of the Emilia-Romagna region for the coordination of European policies for development school, vocational training, university, research, and work. Since 2020, he has been the UNESCO Chair on Education, Growth and Equality at the University of Ferrara and Scientific Director of the International Big Data and Artificial Intelligence Foundation for Human Development. In 2020, he was President of the Committee of Experts of the Ministry of Education for the reopening and relaunch of Italian schools after the COVID-19 disruption. The Minister, is a great pleasure to welcome you here, and I would like to give you the floor. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me thank all of you for inviting me in this conference. This conference is extremely important in this moment to speak about education as the main way to go out from the pandemic. And on the other side, to speak about the new emerging technologies for education is today extremely important. But we have also to stress the fact that the entire society is changing, that also before the pandemic, we were completely inside that deep transformation that we called industrial revolution. We called the fourth industrial revolution. Don't forget it. Also, the concept of industry is changing. And also, the entire economy is transforming in something that is different from the past. Consider simply industry. In the past, we have the idea that industry was a mechanical activities where we need strong workers having basic knowledge and working in quite repetitive activities. Now we are in a completely changed context. Industry now is a complex activities where most of the specific function are made by robots, and the role of control, the role of managing, the role of designing the process is given to people having a strong capacity to manage artificial intelligence and managing also all the impacts of artificial intelligence on complex activities. Most of the activity of services to the people are also changing. Consider that in the past, pharmaceuticals, medicine, were designing activities for people, for most of the people, for a sort of average abstract person. Now all the services can be designed exactly for me, for you, for her. In other words, most of the activities, both on industrial side and on service side, now are personalized. And this personalization is possible because we have all the data of all the people, because we have all the possibility to make analysis, not only based on the past tendency, but also on the simulation of the future. Artificial intelligence is not simply the substitution on individual processes with mechanical processes. Artificial intelligence and big data are the instruments to define new possible high-value activities to enrich the person, to enrich the people, to enrich the countries. The possibility to extend the use of these technologies to education is not simply to enrich the education activities, but is also to prepare our young people to use the instrument of the new emerging industry, the new emerging service sector. Think about agricultural activities. In last century, because I have to say last century, we consider agricultural activity as sort of residual of the past. Now, agricultural activities is the new frontier of production. We are able also to put together all the data, all the informations about meteorological change. The weather can be forecast, and all these data can be coupled with all the data regarding production, the soil context, and so on. Agricultural activity now is also a frontier of technology. And so that also in education, for these sectors, is necessary to train people to use all the instruments of modern life. What can we provide more to the students? It's only a matter of training people to use new technologies, or is something more? It's something more by definition, it's education. It's education that means to train people to use all the instruments in order to avoid to be used by the instruments, and to train people to use judgment. Not only skills. Skills is not enough for education. Not only dexterity, the use of the hands, is not enough, but judgment. The critical capacity to manage all the instruments, to define all the scenarios, and to be able also to learn from what we are doing day by day. There is an extraordinary future for education, because education is designing our future. For this reason, it's necessary to work together to explore all the possibilities to use for education these emerging technologies. For this reason, it's so important to have this School Innovation Forum, and for this reason, it's so important to have this network among the 32 Ministries of Education of Europe. We are chairing this year the G20. The G20 in Catania in the middle of June will be focused on the relation between education and labor, between all the transitions between education and labor. I feel that the work that we are doing in these 2 days became fundamental also for the G20 activities. Europe must be the leader at world level of new education, new industry, new ecological prospects. And for this reason, I think that we have to discuss more and more. So thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you. I really thank you for all the activities that you are doing for the school, for the European school, and for the education at global level. Thank you.
Honorable Minister Bianchi, it's us that that thank you really for the time that you dedicated to us today and for your very inspiring words. I'm particularly pleased because already with our speaker, we are touching upon so many items and topics and themes that we definitely have to keep discussing on and dialogue on. So we will definitely make sure to keep these words with us for the next phases of the event. Thank you once again for having been with us. And now we have also the pleasure to move to Portugal instead and connect with the Professor João Costa, Deputy Minister and Secretary of State for Education. Professor Costa is also chair of TALIS, the OECD Teaching and Learning International Survey, and acted as Secretary of State for Education during the 21st government. He is Professor of Linguistics at the Faculty of Social and Human Sciences at the Universidade Nova de Lisboa. His area of research is formal linguistics, language acquisition and development, and educational linguistics. Until November 2015, he was the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities and President of the Scientific Council of Social Sciences and Humanities at the Science and Technology Foundation. Dear Deputy Minister, Secretary of State for Education, we are extremely pleased that you could find some time for being with us and that you joined us today. Therefore, without further ado, I would leave you the floor. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction, and especially thank you for this wonderful initiative. I'd like to congratulate the European Schoolnet and also the European Parliament for putting up this conference. Let me start by greeting President Sassoli, Commissioner Breton, Minister Bianchi, and the Chair of the Committee on Cultural Education at the European Parliament, Ms. Verheyen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, especially because, as Minister Bianchi just said, the digital transition topic is really a topic that must be a priority of Europe, a priority of cooperation among school systems and education systems across Europe, so that we can grow together in the knowledge that we have to acquire and develop in order to cope with this revolution that is not just evolution in traditional terms, but it's a revolution given the velocity of change and the pressure for adaptation. The topic of this forum is, in my opinion, very well designed. So we are talking about digital, but we're mostly talking about innovation. And innovation in education has this main characteristic, which is we do not need machines to innovate. Sometimes a completely different strategy outside of school in the woods can be a great teaching material, but we can also not disregard that in order to have an updated and really upskilling qualification of our children and adolescents and young adults, we need to introduce the technology in our schools, in our classrooms, but introduce it with meaning. What I mean is that innovation and technology are not objectives, they are tools for better and deeper learning, for inclusion and for promotion of equity in the schools. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is that many times we think that if we have this very fancy technological environment, we are already doing innovation in education. But it can also be the case that we are doing exactly the same that we'll be doing without the technology. So this really requires intentionality. It's also, I'd like also to emphasize and congratulate the European Schoolnet, because there's so much work already done in the last decades that we are really at the position of just continuing and accelerating the work that has already been developed. Portugal was in the first group that contributed this this network, and this also gives us the capacity to address digital transition right now in a what we think is a very integrated and comprehensive approach to digital transition. We are investing in parallel on infrastructure, providing equipments to all the students and all the teachers, but also providing connectivity, school digital educational resources, and teacher capacity programs. And we really think that these four pillars are crucial, because digital transition does not happen if one of them is missing. And the fact that we have a history on this is very good. This participation of Portugal started in the 80s, when we didn't even dream, or at least most of us couldn't even dream of the advances we would be experiencing 30 years later. I remember being in my 8th grade, I guess, 83, I think, and there was a demonstration of a personal computer in our school library. And one of my teachers said, "This is science fiction, this will never happen. Every person with a computer at home, this is impossible. And how do you put the paper in this writing machine if it just have type machine, if this only has a screen?" And well, luckily, we didn't really believe this teacher, and we were very excited about all the others that saw the future coming and made us move on with this. The pandemic has been mentioned several times already during this opening session. It's true that due to the emergency of transforming our systems into systems of remote learning, everyone now agrees that the digital is necessary. I often said that the computer and the internet gained the status of the school bus because it was the only access to the school and to the curriculum. But it's interesting to see that we had two very expressive positions dominating and not conflicting. One is the value of digital transition, the other one is the value of face-to-face education. And this is very interesting, because it really shows that when some people now try to oppose digital to face-to-face, this is the wrong dichotomy. What we aim at is to have more presence of the digital education in the face-to-face experiences at school. We are experiencing this digital transition is, as always, reconfiguring our lifestyle, the way we relate to knowledge, the way we relate to each other. I sometimes name this the dishwasher effect. In some of these tools, it's a bit like our dishwasher at home. We never needed it, but once we have one, when it breaks down, it's a nightmare, because all of a sudden we could not live without it. And it's a bit the same with the technology. It's in our lives, we're surrounded by it, and it's impossible to be responsible in the organization of school systems without integrating digital skills. Digital skills that do not have to do only with the technological skills. It is mostly about how we relate with knowledge, how we can foster the ability to solve problems, to think critically, to provide access to arts and humanities, and most of all, to develop a creative spirit and the capacity to be providing new solutions for problems that we never had an answer for. As was mentioned, and I'm going to finish here, to conclude here, the digital in school is one of the most important tools for the promotion of freedom and citizenship. We are living surrounded by information. This does not mean that we are living surrounded by knowledge, and schools have this crucial role, and the digital can be a weapon or that kills, or a tool that liberates us. And so this means that schools have to provide information on digital literacy, on media literacy, on cybersecurity so that we can act and think freely and not act and think in terms of very superficial readings of things that are imposed on us. We watched the growth of fake news in the past years, of radicalization and populisms, and very much provided by what appears sometimes in our screens. This does not mean that the screen is bad. It just means that we have to have the option, the freedom to choose, and the capacity to interpret. And this is a role that schools can perform very, very well. And when we talk about regulation, we are also talking about a very important leading role that, in my opinion, the European Schoolnet can have. Just to conclude, I'd like to say that holding the Portuguese the presidency of the Council of the European Union right now, one of the main pillars and priorities of our presidency is the social pillar, and social rights are about inclusion, equity, and having a balanced and equal access to equipments and to those weapons for being freer and having the ability to choose and opt and act consciously, in conscience, and not because some algorithm was determined that we should behave in this or that way. Yesterday, I sat for 10 minutes in front of my television, and when I turned it on, I had a question from the service provider, which was, would you like us to adjust the ads to your profile? And I turned off the television, and because first I didn't want to see ads, and especially I didn't want them to be adjusted to my profile because I could find out weird things about my profile and I didn't want them. But what I mean is, let's work on this, let's work together, and let's build a more resilient and stronger Europe also through digital. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State, for your inspiring remark and for giving us a framework to work within when we talk about school innovation. Indeed, technology is a means, is a great tool. It's something that has to be considered in a human-centric and pedagogically sound and based practice. So thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I have now the pleasure and the honor once again to welcome the next speaker, who is the chairwoman of the Committee for Culture and Education of the European Parliament, Ms. Sabine Verheyen. Ms. Verheyen has been a member of the European Parliament for the German Christian Democrats since 2009. In 2019, she got elected as chairwoman of the Committee for Culture and Education after having served as coordinator for the European People's Party in this committee for 5 years. Furthermore, she is a member of the Special Committee on Disinformation. As former mayor of Aachen, she focused additionally on issues that are of relevance to the local authorities, who also have a very strong say on educational matters. So we are particularly pleased to welcome Ms. Verheyen on stage, on our virtual stage today, and thanking you again for intervening. I would leave you the floor.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm very happy that I was invited to speak to you today on the occasion of the School Innovation Forum. There's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about the biggest disruption to education in modern history. This past year, we have seen educational institutions closed for months and some still closed in some countries. At the peak of the first wave, 1.6 billion learners around the world were affected by these closures. That's 94% of the global students' population. The whirlwind speed of technological development, notably artificial intelligence, has also been accelerating the radical transformation of educational practices, institutions, and policies. This sudden digital transition exposed huge gaps in every aspect of what makes digital education work. The current situation must therefore be seen as an opportunity to rethink union policy on digital education and, certainly, to be more ambitious. One thing we have probably all realized is that digital learning must be part of a broader education strategy. On the one hand, we have all seen that whatever happens, in-person learning remains central to effective education and training. On the other hand, we can no longer continue to see digital technologies as a nice to have or as an added extra. They are part of education and training, and we must build them into our systems by design. Firstly, we must embrace technological innovation in learning and teaching. We need to use new technologies like AI, blockchain, virtual and augmented reality, where they can help people learn. In other words, we should embrace innovation in a smart way, building technology into learning. Secondly, we need to do much more in terms of teaching digital skills. On the one hand, that means developing advanced digital skills for high-tech jobs or jobs that may not exist yet. But it also means teaching basic digital skills. And this is very important. We need to help people understand about data protection, cybersecurity, or other cyber threats. And we also need to help European citizens to appraise information critically, to be able to spot fake news and to treat online information with care. Media literacy is vital here. I believe that the Union can help in many ways, in part by setting out a long-term vision for member states, in part by supporting cooperation and coordination, in part through its own initiatives, by testing new ideas and then helping roll them out. There is no doubt that artificial intelligence technologies will meet us in all areas of life in the future and will certainly enrich them. However, we must put people at the center of the use of all technologies, especially in education. AI technology must be focused on the human being, who makes the final decision and holds the responsibility in his or her hands. The Parliament, during its last plenary session, has approved my report on artificial intelligence in education, culture, and audiovisual media. And in this report, among other things, we recall the importance of strengthening digital literacy at Union level as a prerequisite to the use of artificial intelligence in education and the need to train teachers to adapt to the realities of AI-enhanced education, to mitigate risks from misuse of the technology. Teachers must always be able to correct decisions made by artificial intelligence, such as when assessing students. Teachers must never be replaced by artificial intelligence technologies, especially in early childhood education. We have fought for decades to establish our values of inclusion, anti-discrimination, multilingualism, and cultural diversity, which our citizens see as an essential part of European identity. These values must also be reflected in the online world, where algorithms and AI applications are increasingly used. Maximum transparency and the development of high quality and inclusive data systems for the use of deep learning are crucial, as it is a clear ethical framework to ensure access to culturally and linguistically diverse content. Artificial intelligence is a technology that impacts many areas of our lives and is driving digital transformation. One thing is certain in my eyes: ultimately, technology must serve people. People are at the center and must have the responsibility, hold the control, and take the final decision. Especially when it comes to education, the combination of face-to-face learning of human beings' responsibility and artificial intelligence will be the future. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Verheyen, for being with us and for your words. We really appreciate them, and we aim to continue this conversation with the committee, with yourself, with the European Parliament, on how central media literacy and well-being and freedom of our students and pupils is also within this specific debate. Thank you so much once again for spending this time and for being with us. And we will continue now to the next part of today's event. And we have the pleasure to listen to a keynote speech from Dr. Wayne Holmes. Dr. Wayne Holmes is a UNESCO consultant for AI and education. And he will talk about AI in education, of course. He will help us structure our thoughts about this very complex topic. And we will also touch upon how ethical concerns should be addressed when we get into this domain. He received a PhD from the University of Oxford. He also teaches at the University College of London currently. He's a consultant on artificial intelligence and education for UNESCO, and is a member of the Education Program Committee of the International Research Center on Artificial Intelligence. So we thought he was very well positioned to help us really navigate in this domain. So I welcome you on our digital stage, Dr. Holmes, and thanking you already for your intervention. I leave you the floor for your speech.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the kind invitation for me to join you today. It's a real pleasure to be here. To introduce myself to get going, first of all, is that I'm a social scientist, a learning scientist. So I'm not a technologist, but I've been involved in AI in education now for almost a decade. And the reality is I'm really excited about AI in education, but I'm equally worried. So I usually take a critical perspective, thinking about the very many challenges and trying to get behind the hyperbole. So I'd like to begin my talk by getting back to first principles and by asking you a question. So when you hear the words artificial intelligence, what's the first thing that comes into your head? Now, I've asked this question many times before, and often many people think of are robots. But the reality is that AI is much broader than robots. Who thought of self-driving cars, or beating people playing Go, or playing computer games more broadly, or the Amazon Echo or Google Home, or face recognition, especially when we're going through passport control, if we get back to traveling sometime soon. And then there's weather forecasting, or fraud detection, or diagnosis, using pictures like this to diagnose diabetes, or indeed more recently using AI to help develop the COVID-19 vaccines. And what about this? Any thoughts? Well, this is all about prediction of where crime will take place so that the police can focus on those areas. But here's something that's quite interesting. You know, those red spots, typically they're areas where poor people tend to live. So how about this instead? This is prediction of white-collar crime. And then again, we have things like this. Now, if I wasn't talking about AI, I suspect you might have accepted this as a painting by a person. But no, this has been created by AI. And how about this? Every single one of those faces do not exist. Those people do not exist. These have been made all by AI. And of course, on a more daily basis, using things like translation systems so that we can communicate across different languages. And I'm always so grateful when I'm allowed to speak in English, because as a typical English person, I'm only capable of speaking in the one language. So in summary then, artificial intelligence is already here, and it can do some amazing things. It affects our daily lives in many different ways, as we've heard already today. But we usually don't recognize it as AI. Instead, we call it a computer game, or WhatsApp, or passport control, and so on. And occasionally we do have robotics, but that's only one application. But the key thing is that artificial intelligence, and the reason we're speaking today, is it's already being used in education. And to be fair, so is robotics. But I'm going to focus on AI, intelligence, and education more generally. And to start with, the reality is that the expression AI in education is used by many people to mean many different things. So I'm going to try and break it down into different categories, or buckets as I like to call them. But the thing about all categorizations is that they don't really work. There's always overlaps, and we must always remember that. But nevertheless, here we go. So firstly, I talk about learning with AI. Secondly, learning about AI. And thirdly, preparing for AI. Just to reinforce, these buckets are for convenience only, and anything that we talk about might fit into one or more. But nevertheless, learning with AI, we might talk about student-facing AI, teacher-facing AI, and system-facing AI. In learning about AI, we'll talk about how AI works, how we can create it, what are the techniques and what are the technologies. But then preparing for AI, which sometimes does get forgotten, we're talking about how we live with AI, what it means, how we ensure that the AI has human values, the ethics of AI. And then there's a final one that I sneak into the left-hand bucket, and that's using AI to help us learn about learning itself. Now, I'm going to focus first on this first bucket. So, learning with AI. To start with, system-facing AI. Now, system-facing AI are AI technologies that automate aspects of school or university administration, things like admissions or timetabling, learning management, attendance recording, or predicting which students are at risk of failure. So a lot of this stuff is happening all the time in our university and school systems, but it's in the background, so we don't hear a great deal about it. What we do hear a lot about is learning with AI that's student-facing. And here there are many different examples and different types. So to begin with, we have what are called intelligent tutoring systems. And the reality is that when we think of AI in education, these are the kinds of things that we think of most often. The list on the right are more than 30 companies around the world that are multi-million-dollar funded to take these tools into classrooms. Now, the way these work is that the student engages with some information on the screen, an activity, and perhaps a quiz. And then depending on how they respond, that determines the pathway that the individual student takes through the learning materials. But as well as these intelligent tutoring systems, we also have these things called dialogue-based tutoring systems. And these use what's called a Socratic approach, so a conversation. So the system engages the student in a conversation so that together they work towards learning the material. And then we have exploratory learning environments. Now, these allow the students to explore and make connections for themselves. But the reality is we know that that's quite challenging. And so the role of the AI is to provide guidance and feedback to help the students along the way. The next one, automatic writing evaluation. On the right there, the list, these are a bunch of, in particular, tools that are used in the US that are used to evaluate writing for really important summative examinations. On the other side of the coin, we now have automatic essay writing. There are many systems online where you can put in a few words of text and the system will come up with a whole paragraph or a paper, whatever you want. So just as we do evaluation, we need to think about, well, who's actually written this essay? Then we have what we call learning network orchestrators, and this allows individuals to connect. So the smart learning partner is actually in Beijing in China. The student might come out of their class and they don't understand something they've been studying. So they open the app, they put in the topic, and that connects them with a human tutor. And they can share the screen and voice, and they get 20 minutes of one-to-one tuition, where the AI is making that connection in the first place. And then, of course, there's language learning. There's a huge range of language learning tools out there, and every day you'll find a new one. And many of them are using AI quite extensively. And finally, ITS Plus. These are using systems that are like intelligent tutoring systems, but take it to the next level. And then, of course, we have chatbots being used to support learning. One particular new one is Lambda, launched by Google just a few days ago. Definitely worth a look. And finally, smart curation of learning materials. Now, I've not spent any time on all of these because there are so many of them. The purpose was just to raise for you the fact that there are so many different types and ways in which AI has been developed that's student-facing. So moving on then to teacher-facing. Well, to be honest, this is the only one that I'm really aware of. So this is the only tool I've found that's designed specifically to support teachers. And if you know of any others, I certainly welcome any suggestions. But please remember that if you have student-facing AI plus a dashboard, that does not equal teacher-facing AI. Teacher-facing AI has to be specifically for teachers. And there's very little of that about. Moving on then, we've looked at learning with AI. Now, how about learning about AI? Well, a huge amount of work is going on here. This is a project that UNESCO, Unit of Technology and Artificial Intelligence in Education, put together, which has curated many resources that are free from around the world that any teacher or student or parent can use to learn about AI. Another one comes from the US, AI for K-12. But equally, we have in most universities, we have many, many different courses teaching young people about artificial intelligence. And we also have this from Finland, the Elements of AI, which is designed for anybody to access for free. So there's a huge range of different ways in which people are being taught about AI. But what isn't yet clear is what are the actual AI competencies that individuals really need to have, which takes me on to my third and final bucket, preparing for AI. So if we're preparing for AI, the question is, what do we need to learn? What are those competencies? How should young people deal with AI hype, AI biases, fake news that we've heard about already today, and the impact on privacy and on jobs? And the thing is, there are actually many institutes of AI ethics worldwide and various institutions, such as AI Now in New York. But having said that, there's still very little work focusing on this area, and we need far more. We need funding, and we need researchers to be looking into this with much more care. So that's a quick a run over of what AI is being used in education. But what about the limits? What are ways in which artificial intelligence is limited? Well, I'm sure that you've come across yourself headlines like this. Computers are now better than humans. Here it's talking about recognizing images, but it can be at many different ways. But actually, these kind of claims are pretty exaggerated. So the reality is that in most AI, humans are still highly involved. A human, for example, chooses and cleans the data. They label the data. They design the AI network. They train the network. They create the outputs and make the value judgments. So when we talk about AI systems, it's as if the AI system exists on its own in some special category. But the reality is that those AI systems only work because of what humans do. And by talking about AI systems in the third person, it kind of separates and it takes away the human agency, which is something we need to be very careful of. Here's an example of the way in which AI can be very, very limited. So if I ask you what's shown here, I'm guessing that most of you will recognize that as a picture of a panda. And the AI system in question agrees it's a panda, and it's made that decision with 57.7% confidence, which is pretty good. But what happens when we mix that panda with this noise? Well, we end up with this. Now, if I ask you, what does this picture represent? I'm sure you will still agree it's a panda. But the AI system is now 99.3% confident. Unfortunately, it's confident It's now a given. So in other words, the AI systems that are shown to be pretty impressive, they're still nowhere near as good as humans. Here's another example. These are examples of chatbots that you could access online or wherever. Now, the first thing to note is that each of these chatbots, and if you think about it, Siri and Alexa in the home, they're all female. They've all been given female voices. That's kind of interesting. But what's more, these systems, Tay, on its own, came up with racist and sexist comments. Baby Q started doing defamation of others. Rena became Professor Love for Adolf Hitler. And Luda just came out with loads of offensive comments about disability and homosexuality. So we allow these systems to go automatic, and this is what can happen. And what about this? Face recognition. Well, this is an Amazon system, and with that, with lighter skinned male people, the system can be 100% accurate in recognizing a face. With darker skinned males, not quite so good. With lighter skinned females, even worse. And for darker skinned females, incredibly bad. Now, this raises two issues. The first issue is, think about the picture I showed earlier about passport control. For some of us, those systems become inaccessible because of the inadequacies of the system. But the second point is that even if we manage to get 100% across all these different situations for all the faces, so in other words, if we can fix the AI so that it's accurate, does that mean that face recognition is acceptable? I would argue that in many circumstances it's not, and that's the kind of thing that we need to be engaging with very carefully. So returning then to artificial intelligence and education, how does the ethics fit that? So to begin with, there's the data. And the reality is that when we talk about data, the ethics of data becomes very important. When we talk about AI, the focus is usually on the data, how the data is analyzed, what data is collected. The next thing we tend to talk about are the algorithms. How do we prevent algorithmic biases? How do we protect against unintended consequences and so on? Now, those data and algorithmic questions are both fundamentally important. But we're talking about education here, AI in education. So there's a third area that we also need to be taken into account, and so rarely is taken into account. So things about the teacher, about unsustainable technocentric solutions, about gender and ethnic biases within classrooms, about deprofessionalizing teachers, a huge range of issues that we really should be thinking about. But that's thinking about those areas separately. What happens when we bring them together? Well, there's a lot of work on the ethics of data in AI. There's a lot of work on the ethics of data in education, learning analytics. We're beginning to see some work on the ethics of algorithms in education, but this is very, very early days, and we need a lot more focus. But the other question I would leave you with is, what about when these three areas overlap? To date, very little work has gone into that, and yet we need it. So what are the implications of that? So firstly, this was mentioned by some of our speakers earlier today. Are we replacing or are we augmenting teachers? Well, some of the systems, I won't name anyone in particular, actually by default are effectively trying to replace the teachers. Unfortunately, the students say, we didn't have a good experience. The assignments are boring. It severely damaged our education. I don't know about you, I'm personally not that excited by the idea that Facebook is involved in our education. And I pick on Facebook, but all of the big tech are involved in one way or another. So what about this? Another way of replacing teachers, and this is the way in which a lot of the intelligent tutoring systems work, is they turn the teacher into a facilitator. As one CEO of a large company said, teachers only need to play an auxiliary role, working like fast food chefs, KFC-like, to strictly regulated scripts. The problem with this, I think, is obvious. We don't want our teachers to be working to scripts. Our teachers are experts, and we should be supporting our teachers to become even more expert. So in some developing countries, though, this might be a short-term fix. If there aren't enough teachers around, then perhaps by putting the technology in. But actually, that distracts from the core problem, teacher expertise. And so we need to engage excuse me, in capacity building for teachers. What we need to do is to build AI tools that help teachers become super teachers. Moving on to other areas, classroom monitoring. We've heard a lot about this. This is an example from China. Another word is surveillance. Here's another example. But you can note this is not from China. And in actual fact, this technology, the portable EEG, was developed by a US company. And again, we have another word for this. During COVID, proctoring examinations has been a really important thing that's come about, using the computer's camera and microphone to record test takers. But it's complicated, and it can really impact upon the individual students. So the reality is another type of surveillance. Finally, university monitoring. We have situations where when a student goes on campus, when they access the library, when they download something, all of that's being monitored. Here we have pictures of the corridor being monitored. But as Stoker-Walter puts it, the systems represent a new low in intrusive technology, breaching students' privacy on a massive scale. Another word for this is surveillance. Moving on to another topic, what about automated assessment? Well, in the UK, the government department responsible for examinations is, as it says here, exploring the potential use of AI in marking. This is despite the fact that these systems can be fooled by gibberish and are highly susceptible to human bias. As another organization put it, computers cannot measure the essentials of effective written communication, accuracy, reasoning, adequacy of evidence, good sense, and so on and so on. Now, at the moment, in my day job, I'm marking essays at the UCL for master's students, and there is no way an AI system is capable of doing what I'm doing at the moment. Maybe in 50 years, I don't know, but certainly not now. Another way is perhaps we can use AI to replace examinations, because standard examinations are not that useful. They don't tell us what we really need to know. And here's one example: artificial intelligence-based assessment, providing constant feedback to teachers, students and parents about how the student learns, the support they need and the progress they're making. But again, I'm sorry, I've realized this is another version of surveillance. I think there are other routes, other ways in which we can do this, but yet to be explored. So when we think about the ethics of AI in education, there's a huge range of different topics that we really need to be considering. All of these areas appearing on the screen have yet to be researched in any great depth, have yet to be understood, have yet to be seen in context of real classrooms with real students. But that's an area of work that we really need to do. And for all the teachers who are here, if you're thinking of using an AI technology in your classroom, then these are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about. Okay, drawing to a close now, what I want to finish with is 2 points. Firstly, with every tool using AI in the context of education, we have positive points and we have negative points. So we've seen with automatic writing evaluation, a positive point is that they can be used for formative assessment, which can be really helpful, giving the student support so that they can improve their assignment before they submit it. That's fantastic. The negative, the reality is it's simply not capable of doing accurate summative assessment, despite the fact it's being used in many contexts exactly for that. Intelligent tutoring systems I mentioned. The positive, they can learn to personalized learning, which we've heard today is something that a lot of people favor very greatly, but only in limited domains, let's be clear. The negative, though, limited student agency, lack of human interaction, as those students said in the Facebook tool. What about the campus monitoring? Again, we can argue that we're using the monitoring to monitor student well-being, to ensure the students that their mental health state is good. But of course, it's continuous surveillance. How about emotion detection? This is an area that's receiving a great deal of attention in the research community. And the ambition is good to move students from a negative to a positive emotional state to enhance their learning. The reality is we're compromising privacy even further, trying to look inside the student's head, which might be called the final frontier. And finally, continuous assessment. So with continuous assessment, as we've seen, the positive is no more exams, which personally I think is a good thing because they're so weak at assessing what students have actually learned. But on the other hand, they are continuous assessment. So I'd like to use this slide to describe what has been achieved so far. So this mountain represents what the AI researchers, the developers, the companies have achieved, which is amazing. It's impressive. They've overcome huge challenges. However, they usually automate poor pedagogic practices. They usually reduce student agency. They're usually not inclusive. And they usually undermine teaching excellence. But most importantly, they ignore this bigger mountain of possibilities in the background, such as tools to support students to be better students, tools to support teachers to be better teachers. So we need to be able to develop AI technologies to take advantage of these huge opportunities without compromising pedagogy and without compromising human values. So in summary, AI is here, but it's not as clever as many people claim. AI is likely, nevertheless, to have a major impact in education. In fact, AI has the potential to transform education for good, but also for bad. This is why educators, learning scientists, and policymakers must engage with the computer scientists and AI developers to ensure that AI in education meets real needs and addresses the common good. Here's some further reading you might be interested in, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Holmes, for lending us your bucket-based system for addressing the multiple facets of this complex theme that we've chosen for this School Innovation Forum. Thank you also for reassuring us about the limitation of AI, and finally to warning us about indeed what are the main challenges and ethical concerns that we might have to really tackle while we talk about this topic and in relation to its implications for policy and practice for our ministries, teachers, and students as well. So thanks so much for your time. We will now take a little break of 5 minutes before going to the next phase of the event. And we will get also more in depth into discussing some of these topics together with my colleagues Lidija, Kralj, and other distinguished guests that will be part of the next panel discussions. And in the meanwhile, you are also most welcome to, if you like, take a look at the space where we are actually broadcasting from today, which is the Future Classroom Lab, and of which we have now finally a 3D model that even though you cannot travel to Brussels, you can visit and enjoy. You will see there the main pedagogical concepts that underline this inspirational space, and also you will have the chance to know the partners that make this initiative possible. So thanks so much. We will reconnect in 5 minutes with you and the rest of the speakers. Thanks again. Forum 2021. If you're connecting only now, I would like just to remind you that this event is organized by European Schoolnet, and we take the chance again to thank the European Parliament for giving us their patronage. After this first part of today's event, where we listen to several speeches and experts helping understanding why and how we should talk about AI in education, we will now move to the next phase, where we're going to have a roundtable discussion, and where my colleague Lidija Kralj, who is senior analyst at European Schoolnet, will introduce you also to some main findings that came from the Agile consultation that I managed to mention before, which is actually trying to understand among our members what are the feelings, what are the plans and visions for introducing AI in education, and the implications connected to that important topic. I thanks also the speakers that kindly agreed to take part to the roundtable discussion that will happen next. And I would like also to remind everybody that is following the streaming that they are very welcome to share on the chat any comments, impressions, questions, concerns they have in relation to what we are discussing. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Lidija Kralj. Please join me on stage, Lidija. And thank you for leading the next part of this first day of the School Innovation Forum.
Thank you, Tommaso. It is great, and I'm very happy that I could join you at least virtually to Future Classroom Lab and talk about some agile information collection that European Schoolnet did in the past few months. So our topic was artificial intelligence role in K-12 education, and we decided to use agile approach because new technologies are emerging, interesting things are happening in schools, in education, and we have to be quick and efficient in collecting information and sharing the reports so our member states could learn from each other and their examples. So we decided to make a questionnaire during the April, followed by the interviews during the May and June. First report was already published with our steering committee in April 2021. Today, I'm sharing with you this presentation, and final report, which includes answers from the questionnaire and interviews, will be published at the end of June. So we used the definition already published by high-level expert group on artificial intelligence to have a common ground in our questionnaire, and 17 countries answered our questionnaire from all over Europe. So question was at the beginning, what is the current state about debate of AI in K-12 education? And what we acknowledge is that AI is topic receiving plenty of interest from policymakers. Most of the countries marked it as a significant or a mildly interest topic. And already mentioned more than 30 pilot projects or projects on regional or national level already developing in those countries. Most of the countries have started to experiment with AI in education. We are all aware that the different roles, different ideas are experimenting with AI in education. AI is adopted in some areas of education in Malta and Flanders, and France mentioned that they adopted AI as a core part of their educational strategy. So more development in policy documents, in strategies are expected this year. Even until the end of June, some documents are expected to be publicly available. But artificial intelligence in education is mentioned explicitly in some general strategies in several countries. So there are national strategies not only for the education. And also AI is a topic in digital strategy for schools documents in several countries. You can see here that most of the countries have some kind of a document to back their use of AI in education, or to foresee, to envision what is going to happen in the next few years. When we ask countries what are reasons for use of AI in a K-12 education, the most chosen answer was increased support for the students. We could also compare that with a keynote from Dr. Wayne, mentioning several apps and several industry leaders working in that area as well. Second was increased support for the teachers. We also acknowledge that there are plenty of things have to be done to support the teachers in using e-teaching, in providing and supporting AI in education. More are talking also about improving teaching quality, and the smallest number of the countries answered that they are using or will be using AI to improve teacher-student ratio, which I could say talk a lot about, yes, we are not going to replace teachers with AI in any way. We organized our questionnaire in 3 areas, similar as Dr. Wayne mentioned, with learner-oriented AI, teacher or instructor-oriented AI, and the system-oriented AI. So when we asked about what is the current situation in your country, we put some scenarios in the questionnaire so the members could answer what is the common scenario, the most commonly used. You please focus on the green parts of the graph. They show the numbers 2, 3, and 4. So there are few examples or multiple examples or a wide and efficient use of AI on a national level. So we could say that most countries are focusing on enabling students to take control of their own learning, to improve students' learning outcome, also develop skills and knowledge, and the last one is still not so much developed, help students identify knowledge gaps and provide specialized support. If we look on that question from a country's perspective, you can see on the graph numbers 2, 3, and 4 showing that there are a few or more examples of a scenario used in the countries. In some countries, there are no present such scenarios, while in some countries there are lots of such scenarios already in the education system. Our second part was about instructor or teacher-oriented AI. From those scenarios, the most one emphasized was monitor the performance of students so teachers can adapt their teaching. So it also resonates with the students oriented AI. Also, there is parts where country managers identify address of concern to students as a lower scenarios used in their countries. Also, the lower one was automatic assessment of students' learning outcome with grading policy. As we hear from Dr. Wayne, it's, let's say, a dangerous area and have to be thoroughly investigated and argumented how to use it and what to do in such a scenario. If we look at that question from a country perspective, you can see that some countries have several and heavily organized scenarios from instructor-oriented AI, but most of the countries still doesn't have such examples organized or delivered on the national level. Third way was institutional or system-oriented AI. So the countries mentioned they use AI or similar things as to define and access students' motivation, organizing smart content learning pathway. A smaller amount was in predicting students' learning effectiveness and correlation, and the big one in adjusting teaching strategies and teaching materials according to students' learning effectiveness. And also similar, I will show you the same question or scenarios from the country's perspective. You could see some of them has few scenarios, even more than a few, and some of the countries still doesn't have any of such scenarios implemented on national level. We also asked about challenges for the teachers, and you can see that there is several challenges for teachers in developing or acquiring the necessary skill sets for an AI-enabled education. So the biggest one was there are no suitable training programs for them to take. I think that European Schoolnet have some answer or a solution for that problem. Teachers doesn't have enough time. Well, maybe they doesn't have interest, but countries also mention that teachers probably doesn't have interest because they don't know advantages of AI. They don't see opportunities, so they decide or prioritize developing other skills and competencies. They are not aware of the courses, and few countries answer that this is too difficult to develop new skills for teachers. When we asked about challenges on the country level, so what are challenges for the whole country from the ministry perspective, of course, it is always money. So there is not enough money for such initiative. We also recognize that education system are the biggest system in every country. So organizing something like that for the whole region or for the whole country is a complicated and, of course, expensive project. There are no experts in AI in education area. That means this is a sort of responsibility for all of us to develop our competencies, to learn more, to investigate more, to have more experts in the field of AI in education. And several of them mentioned that there are no clear initiatives. And it is a very early adoption of AI in the field of education. So things are still in research, in investigation, in experimental phase in most of the countries. About specialized analytics model, as you know, one of the kind of using AI in education is analytics of the data acquired in the education system. Most of the countries mentioned that they have some kind of learning analytics and reporting tools. Some of them have very low level of analytics, like using some spreadsheets or similar tools, and having a low level learning analytics. Some countries have AI-based solution, but they are not widely or nationally used. Finland mentions that, and Estonia mentioned that they have augmented learning analytics, which are used as a predictive systems in their country. We also followed out our questionnaire with interviews. So here are just a few examples of 4 countries which use different approach. We are going to proceed with other countries as well. So in a final report, you will see all 17 countries and their characteristic and what they have been doing right now in the field of AI. So characteristic for Estonia is a few pilot projects which are working on collecting data, connecting data from user and object interactions, creating interoperability between apps and harvesting those information and data, trying to recommend learning material to students based on what they have done before and on the aims set by their teacher. They're using and going in the area of predictive models. France has AI for humanity in their strategy for artificial intelligence, and education and digital acceleration strategies expect to be published in a few weeks. They organized AI innovation partnerships for learning, and they for 2 subjects, French and mathematics. Partnerships means a combination of experts from ministry, from educational technology, from researchers and teachers. They applied that in a 6 application, 3 for learning French, 3 for learning mathematics, and they're monitoring what is going on with these apps, what data are collected, how could teacher use it the more efficient way, and also provide teachers with advice and decision support how and what apps or technology solution to use in education. In Norway, they are talking about learning analytics. They have several models organized in Oslo schools. They prioritize adaptivity and learning analytics. And one of the characteristics that help them organize that way is a service for unified identity management, so single sign-on page, and every provider of edtech, so learning resources, textbooks, everything is reachable, but with this single sign-on. It also enables them a framework for learning analytics and supported adaptive learning. In Portugal, they organized already 2 editions of their MOOC, Will AI Transform the School as We Know It? They work in a teacher preparation, identify potentialities and application of the use of artificial intelligence in the area of education. They created the content with the support of international experts and leading their teachers to the final model when they create examples how they are going to integrate AI in the heart of education. So that means in the classroom with the students. That brings me to the question about how European Schoolnet could help our members in further development. Most of the countries are expected, so this is the way we are working now, sharing expertise of successful implementation of AI, because we could all learn from each other. And we are going to work and we'll have some resources available in the area of professional development for teachers, but also leadership and policymaker. I think the School Innovation Forum also answers this need of sharing examples, sharing expertise, and learning from each other. I would also take opportunity to thank all the countries that answered our questionnaire and who are going to be active in the interviews in this and next month. Thank you for helping us gather those information, and I hope that you will be happy with the resources, with the information that we are sharing each other. So after this interesting presentation, I hope, we are going to continue with our panel. So just give me a second to stop sharing my screen so I could invite my honorable guests today. So we are continue with the roundtable discussion on the status of AI in education in Europe and beyond, with experts from international institutions and companies. So please welcome our guests, Jan de Kramer, Policy Advisor from Flemish Ministry of Education and Training, Professor Dirk van Dam, Head of the Center for Education Research and Innovation, Senior Counselor in the Directorate for Education and Skills at OECD, Professor Virginia Dignam, Professor of Responsible Artificial Intelligence, Director of WASP-HS, Coordinator of the Committee on Education for the Global Partnership on AI, Lead for UNICEF's Guidance for AI and Children, Professor Fengshun Miao, Chief of Unit for Technology and Artificial Intelligence in Education Sector at UNESCO, Kati Tianen, Digital Learning and Strategy Director at Microsoft. Welcome, my dear guests. It's honor and pleasure to have you all in this School Innovation Forum. I do hope that you will share your expertise and knowledge with our audience, and really looking forward to hear more from your perspective and your examples. I hope you are ready for my questions, and we could start on. Good. Nice to have you here. So, in the introduction and in the lecture of Dr. Wayne, we've seen a current state and some examples on national level, but let's see how it looks from the international and your multi-country perspective. Feng-Shun, from your field of work, what do you see as a current state of AI in education?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and also thanks for the presentation. I co-author the book AI and Education Guidance for Policymaker. I will not repeat the points from the book, but behind the book and behind different use cases, I want to highlight that there's one part of iceberg under the water that is invisible very usually. So we should pay attention to that, is that one of the huge background of the use of artificial intelligence in education and in other sector is the fact that all the human now at least have a double identity. We have the physical identity, and at the same time we have our digital existence. And sometimes in the AI areas, we call it the data profiling, meaning that we have a lot of data around us. When we use mobile phones, platforms, they all generate data. And this data, if we collect it together, we can profile everybody. So, and this become more and more common, more and more widely existing. So this provide the basis for the use of artificial intelligence, especially the database, the AI technology. So we need to highlight this. And in terms of the stage of the use of AI in education, I want to see is that it's at a door of the twilight. It's the door of the bright day, but the day is not coming yet. To analyze the use cases, I think we need to go back to the first principle. The fundamental needs of education, actually, they are very simple. To me, only 3 points. The first one, how we can use technology, including AI, to expand access to education opportunity, for one. Secondly, how we can use AI to enhance the relevance and quality of learning. Only these 2 points for the use of AI in teaching and learning. Of course, underlying that, we need to ensure the human right-based use of AI to ensure ethical, equitable use of AI. So we can find a lot of example, through this very simple 3 perspective. I think the previous speaker will share a lot, but just provide a couple of more example. The first one, to the use of AI to expand access to learning. We should not forget the people with a disability. And AI has a huge potential and has already proved potential over there. For example, to use text and speech, convertive technology to help the people with visual or hearing disability. It's already proven. For example, to use AI to enable the sign language. It's already have a lot of AI tools over there. And that's for the expand the access to education opportunity. The second one, to use AI to enhance the relevance and quality of learning. I think it's very much spoken before by the previous speakers. Actually, to me, the speech is very much focusing on this area. In addition to the use of AI to personalize the learning, I think we also should not forget that, based on the data profiling, AI is to help us to accredit the learning outcome and to have a lifelong kind of profiling of our learning pathway and the learning outcome. For this kind of case, we should not forget that actually sometimes AI and blockchain are combined together. For example, in Singapore, the generator OpenCert, a kind of the use of AI to support the lifelong learning, digital skills accreditation. And also based on this, just another example from Europe is that I'm managing UNESCO's prize for the use of ICT in education. This year we have 2 winners. One winner from Europe is from Finland. It's the University of Turku, the Center of Learning Analytic. They create a platform called Willa. I think you can check out. It's very interesting. They are using, of course, AI in the learning management system, not only to support teaching, but also even to alert the learning loss and also to alert something like the education dropout. So it's combined several elements into one system. And I want to highlight this, but more and more now we can see that there are also specific subject-specific AI tools are coming to the area of AI in education. I will not talk about the ethical at this moment, but maybe I can share some idea later. I will give the floor back to the moderator.
Thank you, Feng Xiao. Virginia, Feng Xiao mentioned that we are in a dawn of AI in education. How it looks like from your perspective? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's okay now.
Sorry. Thank you very much for your question and for inviting me to be in this panel. Yes, we are in a dawn of AI in many different fields, in education as well. But as we are in this dawn, as we are realizing the potential to use AI to improve our education, to improve our well-being, it's important to understand how we want that improvement to be done. How can we best employ AI and use the possibilities of AI in education? In the work I've been doing with the GPI, the Global Partnership on AI, we think that there are basically three different areas on which we can use AI. One is to use AI indeed to improve educational content, to provide personalized educational content, like the previous speaker was talking about, and the possibilities to personalize, to provide content, educational content in many different disciplines in a way that best fits to one with learning. At the same time, we can look at the use of AI to support education management, preparing content, managing content, doing the evaluation, and the invited speaker was talking about these issues before. And finally, also it's important to consider education about AI in order to support and to enable that everybody is able to participate in this future AI, which is enabled by AI. It's important that everybody involved and has the capability to understand what is AI, how AI is affecting our lives, and how can we benefit from that. But at the same time, we cannot forget that AI can also be a contributor to even larger digital divide. So the difference between the ones who have and the ones who have not can be made even greater by the access to AI, and that's something that we really need to take into account as we develop AI. And also at the basis of all this is also the access to the digital infrastructure. We cannot really hope for a world in which AI is working and is contributing to education if we don't make it first that its universal access to digital infrastructure is there for all of us. Only then we can hope that we really can, all of us across the world, in Europe, but that's also outside, are able to benefit from all the potentials. Like I say, in content, in management, but also in education about AI.
Thank you, Virginia. Dirk, did you acknowledge from OECD perspective that universal approach, and what do you see? What is the current state of AI in education now?
Well, I would agree with the other speakers who said that we are at a very early stage. So I think the problem with a lot of innovation in general and innovation in education is that you have such a big gap, a distance between what's happening at the frontiers and what's happening in reality, and then what's happening at the, let's say, the laggards of innovation. So we are often discussing the developments at the frontiers, but we should realize that what's happening in classrooms is still very, very far away from that. And we have seen that during the pandemic, when school systems were required close their physical spaces and to move to online digital forms of delivery of education. It was a nightmare. Let's be honest. We did not do a good job in education. So speaking about artificial intelligence for many teachers and schools is still some far away thing. Yet at the same time, there are happening so many interesting things, and some have already been mentioned. I personally believe that artificial intelligence, but more broadly, maybe smart technologies, digital technologies in education, have a big future. By the way, we are launching a very interesting report next week at the OECD, and we will also have a conference, but we have been exploring the frontiers of what's going on in digital technologies, smart technologies in education. And it's quite fascinating. So we see a lot of opportunities, also some risks. And in the keynote speech just before the panel, the speaker has already alerted us to some of the risks. In my view, he has painted a little bit too pessimistic picture, but we can maybe discuss that later on. But the opportunities are enormous. I would also agree opportunities with regard to access, with regard to people who have all kinds of disabilities. That's a very obvious field where artificial intelligence can help us to deliver education in a much more equitable and accessible way. We have as assessment, I see assessment as one of the big areas where artificial intelligence can improve a lot. Just to enter in one piece of discussion with the keynote speaker, he mentioned immediately biases in assessment, and that's for sure real. But the biases by teachers' assessments are way bigger than the biases used by computers in assessment. So we can actually move forward in our big dreams of providing equitable education for all in a very effective way by smartly integrating AI in our system. So I'm actually a bit more on the optimistic side. Thank you.
Agree with you, Dirk. Tomorrow I will have a workshop about students' assessment supported with AI. So we will learn more examples from the countries and from the teachers in that area as well. Also, Dirk mentioned enormous opportunities. Jan, could you share us what have you learned or come across? Because often personalization of learning is connected with AI. Could you share with us some examples or leading ideas in that area?
You mean about personalized learning, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, adaptive learning resources, I think, offer pupils a lot of possibilities to learn at their own pace and at their own level. And data from these learning activities are being captured and analyzed and used to evaluate individual learning processes. And then actually, the teachers can adjust those learning processes. And by using these data, teachers can provide more targeted instruction. I agree with the former speakers that there are not that many tools already available, at least not using self-regulated artificial intelligence, but there are already a lot of tools which provide a lot of data. Even if we don't have yet fully automized, personalized learning applications, there are already a lot of digital learning resources that provide actual data on pupils' performances. Such as data on how long pupils work on an assignment, number of mistakes and tries when using exercises, things like that. The former presenter, the keynote, has shown us some examples of that. And I think it's very important in any case that we will have the problem of the interpretation of these data, and this triggers for me also the question on data literacy for the current and the future teachers. because it's them that receive the dashboards that are now already in digital learning resources and platform. It's the teachers that have to interpret this data and have to take decisions based on this data, decisions that may have an impact on the pupils' learning opportunities. So this is again something that also comes on top of teacher training, which is, as we all know, already heavily packed. And it does trigger some of the ethical questions on how much we can and should rely on tech and data. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Jan. And I will continue asking Kati almost the same question. So what is Microsoft doing in the area of personalization of learning? Some ideas you could share with us, Kati?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think that the whole use of artificial intelligence is actually very often starting with the data, and it is offering us also a way to learn from ourselves, from our education systems. And I think the learning personalization, seems to be the kind of shining star for many of the educators or education systems to aim for. I would also see the other very important topic is also the dropout prevention, that if we really want to extend the access to learning and improve learning outcomes, I think there's multiple scenarios what we can do with this topic. And yet at the same time, I would also say that today teachers are already using a lot of technology in the classroom or in the learning process that is enhancing artificial intelligence. So if we look, for instance, immersive reader that is helping inside of the Teams environment, that dyslexic kids to learn better, reading, reflecting their own writing, etc. That is all IE solution. Or if we look, many classrooms are using for hybrid learning, they're using Teams or similar systems. For instance, the backdrops that you can hide your real environment, which is actually creating privacy and security for the students that are connected to their hybrid learning. All that is the use of artificial intelligence. So it is starting to be integrated for many of the daily productivity tools we use in the classroom or in the education system. We have launched a project called Constellation, because we see that the private-public partnership is super crucial when we are entering the dawn of artificial intelligence. I couldn't say more that is exactly the right kind of phenomenon for this. And I couldn't emphasize more how important the worry and the awareness of the ethical aspects of this is. Because when we start to create dropout prevention analytics, or if we start to create personalized learning solutions, it's the technology that has to be super ethical. And for instance, we have 6 different ethical principles, how the technology in our cloud environments and Azure is developed. But the ethical goes also to the human behavior of this. So if we would see that education system first has an awareness that what problems we want to solve in our education system or in the classroom with artificial intelligence, that is already a big thing. It has to start with the end in mind. Then the second thing is, of course, that how all the technology is going to be provided here. And the third one is really the change management and making sure that, for instance, data analytics is not becoming a negative stigma for a student, that all the data and insights are used for the good of the learner. So this is a human question, technology question, and education system vision question. So maybe the biggest thing I have ever worked in my career in the area of technology in learning.
We definitely live in interesting time, Kati. I agree with you.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to be, I couldn't agree more with the previous presenter, we have to be very cautious and careful what steps we are taking. But at the same time, we have to take the steps, but we have to look at the back mirror all the time. And we have to be also kind of understanding that at the end, we are creating the artificial intelligence. So we are training the artificial intelligence to have the unconscious bias that we have. So this is also a mirror to ourselves, that what we value. Are we creating a surveillance system, or are we creating an environment where everybody can flourish? So hard question.
Absolutely. I will go back to Virginia with that question. How could we ensure that AI system is shaped to align with human values and ethical principles? What should any AI ethics guidelines for the education system address? I know, Virginia, this is your area.
Yes, thank you
Please
very
help.
much. Yes, it is my area. It is not easy answer. It's not an easy question with one with an easy answer. Of course, we need to take into account the main criteria, the main aspects of responsibility or of the ensuring that AI is trustworthy, and that we need to do it by ensuring some level of responsibility for what AI systems are doing. And in many cases, AI systems are taking decisions, are observing, are sensing the environment, are doing the decisions, are taking the actions in autonomous ways. AI systems are not magic. AI systems are technology designed and developed by people for a specific purpose. So we're also, along with the design and development of these systems optimized for many different criteria, we need to demand from those that develop, design, and manage it to take the responsibility for what the systems are doing. AI systems are interacting with us. So in this interaction, we need to expect from the system, from the environment, the social technical environment in which these systems are used, we need to expect some type of accountability, both in the ways that as providing an account, providing an explanation for what's happening. We cannot be confronted with AI decisions in education or elsewhere that we cannot understand how they were reached, how they apply to us, how they change our understanding. So we need to ask for explanation, but we also need to ask for accountability in case that things go wrong. And finally, because these systems are developed using many types of technology that we sometimes, techniques and methods that are not always the most transparent, we really need to ask for the openness, the understanding, and not necessarily opening up all the black boxes. In many cases, these black boxes are either not interesting enough to open, or too complex to open, or there are all kinds of other privacy or intellectual property issues that might make it difficult to open the algorithm itself. But we do need to ask openness about the processes and the development environments, the reasons, the motivations, the participation, who has been involved, why is this why has this system been, which choices, which options, which requirements have been there. So we really need to ask the openness, the transparency about the processes. So taking these three into account, accountability, responsibility, transparency, which we often talk about ART, it's kind of crucial to all of the applications that we have doing. And again, like I said before, in order to demand this, we really need to have a much more participatory and a much more awareness of what the systems, what the situation is about, in order for the teachers at the schools, the policymakers in education to be able to understand what they should be asking for. And that, I think, is the basis where we need to start, the awareness and the training that, we have to ask for these type of issues.
Do you have some obligatory reading you would recommend to our stakeholders, so policymaker, teachers, our guidelines and ethics?
I don't know. Of course, I would not like to recommend my own book, but I think it might be. But I think that the work that we are doing with UNICEF is something which is accessible to many people. It doesn't really get into the details, but we do provide a lot of background resources to get to more information, and I think that's a good starting point in the guidelines for AI and children developed by UNICEF.
So it is targeting K-12 education also?
Sorry? It's not targeting K-12 education in specific, but it's targeting the interactions of AI with children in many different circumstances, including education. So it's not specific about education, but it probably provides the resources and, let's say, the starting point to find out where to go in this growing field of information and space of papers and information that you can get about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Virginia. I'm aware that we have few experts in the ethics in this panel as well. As Virginia mentioned, trustworthy AI. I remember that word from OECD documents. So Dirk, would you like to comment and what's the emphasis on trustworthy aspects of AI from OECD perspective? And you mentioned that you would like to say something about personalized learning as well. So please go ahead, Dirk.
Thank you, Lidija. Well, first of all, to connect with the previous speaker, I think several international organizations are working on this and are also collaborating on this. We have UNESCO doing excellent work, UNICEF, but also OECD is doing a lot of excellent work. And I think OECD was one of the first who tried to have a consensus among countries on what we indeed called trustworthy artificial intelligence. And while maybe it's not the ideal concept, but with trustworthy, we meant that a technology like AI should be based and be implemented on the basis of trust by its users. So people should be able to understand what's happening, but should also be able to trust what's happening. And I think trustworthy is an interesting concept. For example, if you look at the incident last year in the UK, where the assessments had to be pulled back by the government because they were manifest problematic. That was a matter of trust. It was a matter of public trust in the capabilities of the government to use those technologies in a very problematic circumstance. The concept of personalization, I'm not a big fan, I must admit, and it's used over and over again when we discuss issues of digitalization and artificial intelligence in education. I think I'm a learning scientist. We should never forget that learning is actually not only individual. So I'm very much afraid of promoting implicitly a very individualized perspective on learning. And I think we should also look at how digital technologies and artificial intelligence help us to connect people and to promote a collaborative perspective on learning. So this, of course, adaptive learning based on data and AI and in learning platforms and learning analytics is excellent, but it drives a completely individualized perspective on learning. And that's something that I think we should try to avoid. I see this also as an ethical thing. We should not promote learning as something which is only individual. It is about individuals being connected with communities, working together in collaborative spaces. So schools are developing into collaborative spaces and have always had this element of working together in classrooms. Artificial intelligence should not move us away from this notion of learning as something collaborative. I just wanted to make this point because I see this overusage of the word personalization, and I don't like it.
Thank you, Dirk. I think that there are positive sides, there are bad sides, and but also we have to be aware what is possible to do with personalization and how to use it for students' best and for supporting the teachers in the future. Agree with you.
I think this is a good example that we have to define what the learning personalization means. That when we start to talk about these solutions and innovation, because it can also mean that we can identify, for instance, I have dyslexia, but it wasn't identified until I was in high school. So if the learning, path would have been personalized, hopefully, my dyslexia would have been identified and I would have been able to get the special support to take that obstacle away from my learning. So it is a very good discussion example of it, that when we are talking about learning personalization, we have to define what that means on its best version, because I fully agree, it doesn't mean that we are learning in isolation. We have to have the collaborative community engagement, because those are really big learning goals in the 21st century skills as well. So, but top on example, what we have to define.
Agree. I also heard one example. Why is my kid getting tougher and complicated tasks from the personalized system, and the fellow colleague is getting easier tasks? So, okay, plenty of things for investigation and research in that area. I'm going back to function. I know that UNESCO mentioned in publication AI and Education Guidance for Policymaker that AI in education is worth more than 6 billion by 2024. What does that mean? And also, you mentioned that recommendation on ethics will be adopted this year. So please share more information about both of the things with us, Function.
Thank you. I start from what I like. It's the UNESCO-led recommendation on ethics of AI. UNESCO has been leading the development of the recommendation on ethics of AI for several years, and we are finalizing the text, the document, and we also complete we call it intergovernmental consultation, which means all the member states of UNESCO, almost 200 member states, spoke out their opinion, provide their comments. So we are finalizing the document, and we are planning to adopt it by the General Conference of UNESCO in November of this year. So you can expecting a huge reading. And to me, it's a very comprehensive and holistic guiding ethical principles about the use of AI in all the areas. It's not only about the AI in education. And in addition to that, actually, we are planning from UNESCO to develop ethical principle on the use of AI in education, in teaching and learning. So it will take a couple of years, but we are planning to do that. So that's about the ethics of AI. Come back to the statement of the market value. First of all, I want to say that it's a kind of marketing strategy. We made a reference to the global market insight. It's their prediction. I want to draw your attention from the amount of the money to the structure underlying this prediction. I think the more valuable elements of this prediction is how they predict the market value. I think it's a reminder of the ecosystem we need to build if we really want to make effective use of AI. Because this prediction implies that we need to have a system-wide upgrading of the learning system, and this upgrading should go through out of the AI life cycle. It's not only a certain stage of the AI; it should go through the life cycle of the AI. It includes the analysis of need-based application models. As we spoke earlier, it's for learner, it's for teachers, or it's for education management. This market value is made based on the analysis of the needs-based application models. And the second one also, it pertained to the deployment models of AI tools and technology, meaning that are we using the cloud platform, or is we call it on-premise? You deploy AI tools in all the end users' hands, which means you deploy the AI tools and store the data in the school campus, in the local school community, or you store the data in the kind of cloud solution. I think Microsoft should have some say about that. And the third one is that it's the values, it's the market value in terms of the development of AI technology, including how to collect the data, how to process data, meaning the algorithm, how we could develop the algorithm to support the use of AI education, and finally, how to integrate different data and algorithm into AI solutions for teaching and for learning. So that's the third perspective we need to consider. And of course, it will also pertain to the different stage of learning, the preparation of the teaching and learning process, learning assessment, and also accreditation of the learning outcomes. Of course, this will also concern all the levels of education. Before I finish my quick reply, I want to make a metaphor. To me, the use of AI and data in education is very much like the use of a microscope in the medical area. I want to see that the Microsoft really empower the doctors and the medical workers to have a deeper insight about the disease and about the solutions to the disease. But the use of microscope will not make a person without medical knowledge to be a good doctor. The use of AI in education is the same. The use of AI in teaching and learning will not make people who without pedagogical knowledge to be a good teacher. We need to rely on the human teachers. We need to train the teachers about how to make informed decision based on the data. It's not relying on the machine to make a decision. I think this is the principle we should hold almost forever. Back to you.
Thank you, Feng-Shun. You several times mentioned the data, also the other speakers. So Kati, we are getting back to you. You mentioned the project Constellation, and that is about responsible data in AI. So what are Microsoft's main activities in the field of AI and education, and also what role ethics play in AI when we talk from a Microsoft perspective?
So, because this requires the public-private partnerships, this is something that, no company can do this or should do this. This is really about what problems education systems want to enhance and solve. And yet at the same time, this does require computing power. So I would say that if we look very advanced analytics or artificial intelligence solution, on-prem solution is very hard to implement that. So all this innovation is played on the cloud technologies. If we want to go around it, we can try it, but really the high computing power is needed, and the kind of leverage for the fourth industrial revolution is in the cloud. And that's why the ethical piece is also that, okay, how these cloud solution technologies are, built, who owns the data, how is the data and privacy and security protected. And that's why, for instance, the European Union is one of the leading policy makers in the world of really challenging also the big technology providers around these topics, which is hugely important because we see, risks also for the social media environments where the companies are owning the data. So that's a very clear example, for instance, where the ethical questions lies in the business model of this, organization. But in Constellation, we have had an open invitation for education systems who want to co-innovate and co-design the advanced analytics and ethical solutions and have like learning kind of community around those education systems. We have about 46 education systems who have started to explore what this could mean. And one thing that we find extremely important is that if we look some other industries, many of them have developed data and analytics and IE in open source concepts. So that's why, for instance, we have published free open education analytics blueprints, ethical kind of technical guidance, professional development and skilling, support for all education institutions who want to start their journey. And that is, published in the world's biggest open source GitHub community so that every system and any developer can have access to that. So we want to bring public-private partnerships together. We want to enable the early adapter education systems to learn from each other. We want to collaborate with the non-governmental organizations and global organizations that are part in this call, and yet at the same time make that as an open source asset available for everybody. So it's quite inspirational, and at the same time, we have to do it in a very humble way. And remember, the ethical piece has to be integrated throughout the technology implementation to teachers' professional development. Because like Virginia explained about the transparency, we have to make sure that if we have some system that is recommending some interventions or personalization, that teacher has to understand why the solution is doing that recommendation. So the transparency goes all the way to the parent or teacher or student behavior. So it's a huge change management and skilling challenge for all of us.
Thank you, Kati. You see all of us nodding, especially when I mentioned on a partnership. Combination of research, policymakers, teachers, school, education system. I think all of us have to give our knowledge and share expertise to get better solutions for our students. So from that, I'm going back to Jan. A lot of research is already happening around AI in Belgium, and according to OECD figures, the number of publications focusing on AI and machine learning is steadily increasing, with the number of publications for Belgium exceeding the average of the EU 27. So various projects and initiatives are already happening in Belgium about how to stimulate AI in primary and secondary school. So I heard about the project KICS, Wicked, EduBox. So Jan, how it looks like to be in a Belgium, in a Flanders, and work on such interesting projects in the schools?
Okay, yeah, well, in Flanders, we started with policy in 2019 when we had this Flemish action plan on artificial intelligence. And this has several key actions and also an annual budget of 30 million euros to support AI developments in the whole society. And when you have some money, when you have that amount of money, you can actually do something. It provides lots of opportunities. So the three pillars were research, support measures to integrate AI in businesses and the workforce. And then the third pillar was awareness, education, and training. So that's the main reason why there is that much research and that much training available, because of this action plan. In terms of training, the Flemish AI Academy was founded by the government to prepare and support Flemish workforce for the transformations that AI will bring to their profession. And we want to ensure that citizens don't simply undergo all these new developments, but also face it in an informed and expert manner. And the action plan actually led to a lot of training courses in our universities and higher education colleges with all kinds of bachelor, master, and postgraduate courses in the fields of AI. But there are also different and more broadly accessible MOOC-type kind of courses that are aimed at the broader public, based a little bit on the Finnish example that was mentioned before, and aimed at basic concepts of AI and providing an overview of applications. Another outcome of this action plan was the establishment of a knowledge center on data and society. And actually, that's our own knowledge center that tackles all kinds of ethical issues related to the use of data and AI, and also develops, for instance, some of the pedagogical tools and learning materials for schools. So also for us as a Ministry of Education, this knowledge center is an important partner as well. So that's what's happening, and it would lead pretty far to go into detail in specific projects like KICS and so on. But I think what is important is that from a policy perspective, it's not only about funding research and development, but also about how we can unlock the expertise in the research institutions so it can flow back towards the workforce and towards the society and towards the schools and the teachers as well. So that's also a very important aim of this action plan.
I heard the first line which said, when you have the money, you could do. It goes back to
money.
No, it goes back to information we gathered in our questionnaire, because the biggest problem is the money. But from all I've heard from the five of you, there is plenty of things we have to solve, we have to research, find a solution or experiment, which could be more problem than the money itself, I would say. So one question for all of you, so who would like to answer, when we are talking about AI in education, where do you see more perspective or better ways of implementation in which level of education? Is it for early childhood, primary, secondary schools, higher education? What is the current state, or where do you see more perspective nowadays? Dirk, please go.
Yeah, I would not make a distinction between the levels of education. I think all levels can benefit a lot. But I would like to twist the question a little bit. For me, the more relevant question is, who are the principal actors in this domain? Maybe apart from scientists and and also the private sector, because I agree very much with Katie that this is a public-private kind of thing that we need to tackle. But I would like to focus and say a few words about teachers, because I think teachers have maybe been a little bit away from our conversation this afternoon. And for me, the teachers are really the driving forces in this process of innovation. So we can talk a lot about professional development and raising the competences of teachers in understanding and using data, etc., etc. But we also need to redefine their roles. And artificial intelligence and other smart technologies in education, they are not going to reduce the role of teachers. And you sometimes see still these very simplistic accounts of teachers becoming coaches and learning platforms taking over the whole teaching and learning experience, and teachers being the administrators or the architects or the engineers even of teaching and learning. No, artificial intelligence will really put the teacher at the center of the experience. But the teacher, like the medical doctor, and I think the analogy that Feng Chun was using is quite appropriate. The medical doctor has not seen his professional expertise diminishing because of surgery from a distance or whatever data-driven tools in his profession. The teacher will have all these tools at his or her disposal, but will have to orchestrate them all, and will have to apply an enormous amount of expertise in teaching and learning to do that well. So for me, the teacher is really at the center of the whole development.
Thank you, Dirk. Agree. Empowering teachers is something that will happen during the next few years in the area of AI. I think we are all obliged to do that. Jan, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, well, I agree with Dirk that personally, also for me, I don't think that the level of education should play a role or an important role when it comes to deciding whether you use AI applications or not. It doesn't really matter if you do that in primary or in higher education. But actually, your question triggered another topic for me. Namely, that it is important that basic concepts which relates to AI or data are properly integrated in the curriculum. In the current curriculum reform that we have in Flanders, and actually for the first time, there is a much bigger component on ICT, computational thinking, and media literacy. And I think it's very important that basic skills which have to do with AI and data literacy are included. For instance, basic concepts behind coding and computational thinking, or basic insights in data and the ability to interpret and visualize data, things like that. Those are actually becoming basic skills that every citizen should have in order to deal with AI. And at very different levels in education, this should be part of the curriculum somehow. Yeah, if we look, for instance, at coding and computational thinking, writing an algorithm, applying an algorithm, that's something that's learned in secondary education, but also basic notes of coding and programming can be learned in primary education. I mean, the tools are there.
Absolutely agree, and have to say that Croatian curriculum have such parts even for our first graders. But I know that Feng Chun is working on a mapping curriculum about AI. Feng Chun, please go on.
Yeah. First of all, I want to resonate what Dirk and Jan said about the teacher. Actually, last year, we organized the International Forum on AI and Education. During the forum, many teachers or people with the experience of working with the teacher, sound out opinion that the use of technology, including AI in education, is not reducing the number of teachers. It's requiring more number of the teacher and a higher capacity of teacher. So that's the funding is not something like the talk. So we really need to think how to build the capacity of teachers. And for your knowledge, in the beginning of this year, I was invited by Korea to deliver a lecture to teachers. They have a program to train starting from 1,000 teachers and roll out to more and more teachers about AI technology. I think it's similar to what Belgium is doing. And you mentioned the competency. I also want to see that I don't think the education level is the entry point for the use of AI in education. It should be the needs. I think one of the needs I think all the country need to do is really to define the AI competency and also develop the AI competency for all the citizens and specifically from the K-12 students. Because it's them who will develop your AI solutions, no matter for education or for other area. If you are not fostering the AI talents in your country, you will be driven by the commercial company and driven by other countries, especially for Europe. It's not really in the leading position now. I think it's very important to develop the AI competency. As you said, UNESCO is planning to develop a guiding framework on the AI competency, starting with the school education. I want to stop here. If you want more information, I can share with you. Yeah.
I know. I think we could talk for hours on these topics, and on every new question, new topics is opening. But unfortunately, we are coming to an end. And for the final question, for the wrap up of this session, I would like you to become a visionary. So, what do you expect that first implementation of AI in future will happen in our education system? Virginia, please go first. So what future holds for us?
I think the future is already here, and we already quite a lot of applications are around. And like I say, what I think which we really need to take into consider for the future is that we employ AI to make the digital divide disappear instead of making it increase. And that is, I think, a very important way to look at it, that we cannot use AI in a way that people are left behind. So we really need to ensure that no one is left behind. And that is what should lead whatever applications of AI we are seeking for the future.
Thank you. Jan, what future says for you and Belgium?
Yeah, I don't know, but I think one of the ambitions, at least, that we should have is that we close the gap between the imbalance between the excellent AI expertise that there is in our top AI research universities, colleges, strategic research centers on the one hand, and on the other hand, the limited knowledge of applied AI with professionals in the business world, government, and teachers. And I think the ambition should be that we try to close that gap, and that we can benefit in education, but also in the wider society, by all these developments that are being developed right now in our research institutions.
Thank you. Function. What will AI bring to K-12 soon?
Yeah, I think it's an upgraded learning system. It's a next generation of the learning system. Because I found one participant asked what's the difference between AI and other ICT. The difference is very unique, is that the traditional ICT is very responsive. You click, they respond to you. AI is behind us. AI is more invisible, more proactive, and more intrusive. So they are behind. And it belongs to the infrastructure that we cannot see, but they are controlling us. They are using our data, and they control our, influence our decision making. So I think my vision is that after 5 years, 10 years, we should have a next generation of the learning infrastructure, just like we have the current generation of a medical system that is different from 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
So we will see some changes in education system as well, not to be the same as 100 years ago. Agree. Kati, what is a future perspective?
I agree with Virginia that the future is here today, but at the same time, we have to still work what the future looks like. And I think that no other society segment is facing this channel and has so incremental role in this change, because at the end we have to make sure that our education systems, starting from the curriculum, like Jan explained, is enhancing the future. We have to make sure, like Dirk has mentioned many times, that artificial intelligence and advanced analytics is actually empowering the teachers in the classroom and is making their work even more impactful. It is our teachers are supermen and women, but we really want to empower them with those tools. And then we should also make sure that all this work is generating artificial intelligence and technology careers to be something that it's interesting all different society people, that we cannot develop technology only with certain part of the society. So we have to make sure that technology, artificial intelligence development is equal industry and not only dominated by young men. And that is like huge challenge for this specific part of our society. And that's why this dialogue between policymakers, researchers, organizations, and companies is so crucial, because this is three-dimensional game for us. This is not something that we take certain business and we kind of upgrade that, through pots or something. This is much, much more complex, and the impact to the society is the biggest that for any other segment in the society. So you hold a lot in your hands.
Absolutely, a lot, and responsibility and opportunity. Dirk, what will you say for us?
Well, I think the future is not yet here, so I have a different view than Virginia. I think we see this enormous gap between the opportunities and the possibilities and the frontiers of development and the everyday reality in our classrooms. We have not succeeded yet in very simple digitalization in education. And as Feng Chun has mentioned, AI is something completely different than just using digital technologies in education. So I'm optimistic about the opportunities and possibilities. I'm pessimistic about the gap that needs to be bridged to bring that really into the classrooms and to the teachers. And it will depend on whether systems and policymakers and leaders of education systems will be ready to change some very basic concepts of what makes our education systems still so very industrialized. It's the industrial way that we organize education is preventing us to implement smart technologies in education. So if we look at possible future scenarios, and we published just a book on 4 scenarios for the future of education, and they are very promising, but there is also a risk of conservatism and the risk of just maintaining the status quo that we see in education systems today.
Thank you, Dirk. I even heard sentences about not slipping back after the changes that happened in the past year in all the schools in the whole education system. So for this time, I thank you all for being our guest on School Innovation Forum. Thank you for sharing the knowledge, expertise. I learned a lot from you, and you get me a big amount of literature to review and read and learn in a future time. I hope you will enjoy in the rest of our School Innovation Program in the next 2 days. And thanks again. It was great to have you here on floor with us. Tommaso, I think we are ready to go back. Schoolnet studio in Future Classroom Lab. I can't hear you.
All right. Is it working now? Yes.
Yes, it is working now.
Here we are back at the Future Classroom Lab. Lidija, thanks so much for leading this very inspiring and eye-opening conversation. It will serve very much in the next days as fundamentals for the additional conversation that we're going to have. And I take the chance to thank again all our honorable guests for really taking the time to be with us and enter into this open dialogue, which we really wanted very much to make happen this year, at least online. So thanks again, Lidija. Now for the closing remarks, I would like to give the mic and the floor to our executive director, the executive director of European Schoolnet, Marc Durando, that will have the chance to wrap up what has been said by all the contributors to this first day of the School Innovation Forum. Marc, thanks so much to join us on stage, and I leave you the floor. Thanks again.
Many thanks, Tommaso. Do you hear me properly? Yes?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, so we already had a quite long afternoon, and I will not be too long for these closing remarks. First of all, we thought important at the level of European Schoolnet to initiate this dialogue on artificial intelligence, which is a topic high on the agenda of our ministry's members. The objective of the School Innovation Forum is really to challenge assumptions related to artificial intelligence, but also to focus on opportunities, and more importantly, on the challenges, ethical consideration and risks. This first day gave us the opportunity to listen to Dr. Holmes, and many thanks to Wayne for having accepted our invitation. He presented to us the potential of artificial intelligence, both for the school administration, but also for the pedagogical developments. He also pointed out the limits of artificial intelligence, as well as the ethical issues of artificial intelligence in education. So the roundtable discussion, which just closed, also enabled us to have the first key findings from the member-wide consultation that European Schoolnet launched with its ministries on the development in the area of artificial intelligence. Also, the roundtable highlighted some quite important elements, and I don't have the pretension to summarize everything, but I noticed the following elements which are worth being shared with the audience. The potential of artificial intelligence to expand access to learning opportunities, especially for people with disabilities. The potential of artificial intelligence to enhance quality of education and improve educational content. The importance of educating about artificial intelligence, the capability to understand what is artificial intelligence. We also raised during this roundtable assessment issues and also the trustworthy aspect of artificial intelligence. One major important element which also has been raised is the role of the teacher, and to consider teacher as being the orchestrator of the learning processes. And also the reflections regarding the importance to start integrating basic concepts of artificial intelligence in the curriculum. So more globally, there is a debate, even more importantly nowadays, about the place of educational technologies within our education systems. One of the lessons learned during this COVID-19 crisis was the importance to identify those new learning activities where the use of educational technology is really important and will provide genuine added value. Artificial intelligence may certainly have an influence on the state of education today and the potential to transform how our education systems operate. During this afternoon, we also discovered quite a lot of areas linked to the implementation of artificial intelligence approaches in our education system. There is, of course, the concern of emerging technology should also lead our policymakers to raise a certain number of important questions, which are frequently overlooked. Such example, how might these emerging technologies interact with the existing social context of education? What assumptions about learning and teaching processes drive these technologies? What forms of learning will therefore be valued or ignored? What evidence is there to support their impact on learning? and also what non-educational consequences might result from these technologies, especially regarding inequalities, impact on teachers' work, or other ways of altering the character and conditions of education. We'll try to answer these questions and challenges in the program of the next 2 days, with other roundtables, which will be proposed, and various parallel workshops, which will be organized. I would like to thank very much all speakers who accepted to share their views with us today. I will not name all the speakers again of today, but be assured of our gratitude for having accepted our invitation. I would also like to thank the European Schoolnet team behind the organization of this event, with a particular mention to Tommaso Dalla Vecchia, who has acted as our Master of Ceremony and is behind the organization of the School Innovation Forum, to our technical team, Jessica Manini and Andrea Panizza, but also to Eugenia Artola, who contributed to the preparation of this event, and more particularly to Konstantinos Andronikidis, who has supported us all along for organizing this forum with all the speakers. I wish you fruitful discussions during the next 2 days. My last word is also for our future Classroom Lab industry partners, which have supported us in the organization of the School Innovation Forum. Many thanks again, and I'm now formally closing this first day of our forum.